Carol and I are going to talk about unmet needs and disaster case management. I love working with unmet needs. This was my passion after the tornado. I really loved working with the disaster case managers, the families who were affected, and really getting into what individual needs were and how we could impact lives. So I also love to tell stories, and these are just some pictures from Joplin. We had a lot of amazing groups that came and helped with our unmet needs. And these are just the disaster case managers up there at the top with Catholic Charities, and we had Rebuild Joplin, Samaritan's Purse, Habitat for Humanity down here in the bottom. And they all work together. And that's one of the biggest aspects. And what I have here is how all of us have to work together. So even though I'm going to be talking about unmet needs, the Unmet Needs Committee has to work with the Volunteer Committee, and they have to work with the Construction Management Committee and the construction managers. They all have to work together to make your recovery effective. So even though it's one piece and you may be on the Unmet Needs Committee, you have to be really connected and networked in with all of those other committees for your recovery to be effective. The social and spiritual needs, the crisis counseling, all of those play a huge role in effective recovery. And I'm not going to spend much time on this, but the FEMA sequence of assistance is important for you, as whether you're a board member of your long-term recovery, whether you're on the Unmet Needs Committee or what. You have to kind of understand that sequence of assistance. So this is just to kind of reiterate that where the unmet needs piece comes in. You've got all of these other aspects that come in. You have insurance. You have whether they have personal property assistance or not. They have whether they have the FEMA state or other needs assistance. All these different things that come in, and then unmet needs are way over here. So you have all of these other components that come in first. And really your unmet needs, your financial assistance and resources from the unmet needs table, I mentioned yesterday, is really your funding of last resort. It's your whenever everything else is utilized, that's whenever you go to that unmet needs table, okay? All right, so just a little bit about what that Unmet Needs Committee does. They bring together people dedicated to ensuring successful recovery. So on our unmet needs table, we had disaster case managers, we had social service agencies, we had faith-based entities, we had business people from the community who wanted to give back. We had all of these different people with different perspectives coming in to provide that guidance and assistance. One of the biggest parts our Unmet Needs Committee did was develop resources. It wasn't always about cash. It wasn't always about how can we pay for something for somebody. A lot of it was developing those resources, finding out who in the community or outside the community, if you have too much impacted in your community, can donate mattresses. What organization can come in and help with childcare. It was all of those. It wasn't just the housing. It was all of those unmet individual family needs they may have had. We brought in people about employment. We brought in people about education, about childcare, about understanding your renter's insurance, all kinds of different unmet needs that those families would have. That's what that Unmet Needs Committee does. They develop resources around that. So we did a pretty comprehensive unmet needs directory that had all kinds of resources, and it changes because that's part of the nature of things. You have new organizations that are coming in that are providing resources that weren't there 2 months ago. So you have to be savvy in one, vetting those organizations and making sure that they're there for the long haul, that they are actually providing the service that they're saying that they're providing, and that they have a good history. But you're also making sure that whenever those things change and the application process changes and all of those different aspects change, that you're making sure that your community is aware of that. And I'll give you some best practices along that here in a moment. We worked a lot with local government and disaster organizations to assess needs. We've already talked about gathering the data, figuring out how many people are impacted, figuring out how many families are needing assistance still. An interesting story in Joplin, we had this huge devastation. We had FEMA come in, we had AmeriCorps come in, we had our disaster case management starting to get set up. And the triaging early on, FEMA's triaging was on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being, I don't remember which way it was, but 1 being extremely high need, 5 being not much of a need. And whenever the AmeriCorps volunteers were trained initially, they were trained the opposite way. So they were triaging people, but they were rating them the wrong way. So it took about 2 months in our unmet needs to figure that out. So we had people who we were sending case managers out, and they were trying to figure out, well, why is this person ranked so high? They had, a door damaged. And the next person they were finding, why wasn't this person ranked high? They lost their whole home. So it took some time, and that, that training and data collection and everything, you have to make sure that you're communicating effectively. But that really hampered early on our disaster case management, because they had come in and this was 2 months of incorrect information. We work within the disaster case management system to verify and fund unmet disaster-related needs. And I'll talk about that process here in a moment, exactly how that worked in Joplin and how that typically works with, within the National VOAD framework. And then we provide resources to disaster case managers to support their processes. That's one of our biggest part was, as the Unmet Needs Committee, we're there to support the processes of the disaster case management. And I've seen other disasters where they work, an Unmet Needs Committee works almost antagonistically with the disaster case managers. That can't happen. It has to work in connection. You have to be really well connected. You have to know each other. You have to trust each other. And you have to support each other, because you are there to help with those long-term recovery efforts. And then a huge part of what we did in Joplin, and I think what part of our successes were, is providing community education. Our Unmet Needs Committee really took this as a huge component of what we wanted to do, and we did a lot of community education with our disaster case managers, with our survivors, and with our community as a whole. We also did a lot to get the word out about successes. I told you how we are a huge celebrating community, and that's one of the things that our unmet needs, as well as our long-term recovery committee as a whole, did, is we worked really hard to keep the media aware of what was going on, to keep our story pertinent in the media, so that people were still wanting to read about us. They were still wanting to hear about what was happening to our families. And this is one, I think Renee said yesterday how we have a lot of murals now. I mean, we have a lot of murals. Renee and my faces are on one mural, and every single time we walk by it, my son has to point it out. And so, not the best picture of me, but I'm mom, and I will smile and pretend I like it. But this is one that came out within like a week of the tornado. Somebody did this one that we really enjoy as well. So resource development, I mentioned that as a component of what the unmet needs committees are really needing to do. If you just kind of meet and talk about what the disaster case managers bring to you and fund them, then you're missing the boat of what you can really do to make it effective recovery. So the resource development, obviously part of it is with providing financial assistance. We did a lot of financial assistance for housing, utility deposits, replacing furniture, we even helped with car repairs. In Joplin we had a lot, I'm sure here as well, lots and lots and lots of vehicle damage. Even if they didn't lose their home, they may have been at Walmart and lost their vehicle. And a lot of that made it difficult because they may not have qualified for FEMA assistance because their home wasn't damaged, but they lost their car. And those were some places where they would come to us needing assistance. Locating options for quality, used or inexpensive new household items. You're going to have people who come to you and say they want those granite countertops, or that they want that combo washer and dryer like they had before. But you have to be really savvy, and one of the things that's on both the Jasper County COAD website as well as what will be on the DLT website, we have a really good guidance that we developed in Joplin that says, here's exactly what we will fund, here's what we won't fund, and here's why. Sorry. I move a lot. I'm getting out of the frame. I move all the way over here. But you really having that determined ahead of time, and that way you can justify it. Whenever somebody does come and say, you didn't put me back like I was, you can say, that's not our role. Our role, and we're a nonprofit, our role is to get you back to a livable condition. Our role is to get you back to where you can be home, and you can be in a home that is safe and is effective for what your needs are. So, there's a lot of options out there. A lot of the national chains want to give donations. A lot of small, I'm a big believer, if you don't ask, you're not going to get. And if you just automatically assume that they're not going to give you, then that's what's going to happen. They're not going to give you. So don't be afraid to ask. We had I'm trying to remember the name of it. I think it was Harvey's or something like that. It was a local used furniture store in Joplin, and all the case managers would go there and buy items from them. And we started asking them, would you give us some deals? Would you maybe periodically donate? A lot of the case managers didn't want to ask because they thought that they would be asking too much of a business person. And the man was like, you know what, I'd love to. I'll give you a certain number of chest of drawers a month. I'll give you a certain number of used chairs a month. And he started looking for extra things for us that he would get for really, really cheap. And he'd set aside for our disaster case management. So it drastically reduced how much money we had to spend for getting somebody back home. We also did a lot of resource handouts because we lost a huge amount of childcare. I mean, our childcare, and this was the first week of summer, so school's out. Parents are having to figure out what they're going to do for childcare, and the majority of our childcare was gone. So we did a lot of resourcing around childcare. Our Joplin Family Y stepped up and provided a lot of childcare. We provided resource sheets on housing. Where can you go for housing? As the housing was coming back online and we were starting to get more housing, we continually provided that information to people. What housing resources are available? Who takes Section 8? Who takes HUD assistance? Which housing is accessible for people with disabilities? All of that information we constantly updated and we shared out. We utilized a lot of the trying to remember the name of it. It was an employment program. What was it, Renee? Yeah, we had a lot. The workforce development did a lot of, and AmeriCorps, but workforce development did a lot of assistance for individuals who were displaced from their employment. So we had people who we could put to work doing different jobs that we didn't have to pay for. So we were able to utilize a lot of secretarial and different things to do surveys, to develop some of these resources for us. So in my office, we use one of those individuals to maintain our housing resource directory. We also did some one-pagers and resources on employment, where to go for assistance if you've lost your job, where to go for assistance to try to get back into employment. And then general resource handouts on financial assistance. So one of the things that was one of the my favorite components of our recovery were survivor workshops and our disaster case management coffees. Our survivor workshops we got really excited and had a lot of fun with. Every single time, have food, people will come. So we always had food, we always had giveaways, we always had childcare. So those three things, we had the Y provided free childcare. We always had an organization donate food. A lot of times, Chick-fil-A and different places would donate food for us. And then we always had some sort of a giveaway for people to get them to come. And we'd have 2 times for everything. We'd have a day one for people who were maybe working nights, and we had a night one for people who were working days, so that there were always resource available for them. We did things like understanding the disaster case management and FEMA assistance process. It can be really daunting to somebody. We had people who were afraid to even apply or afraid to even go to disaster case management because either they'd been told by somebody they weren't going to qualify. You know, there's a lot of rumors that go around whenever disasters happen. So they've been told, oh, don't waste your time. Or they've been told, you don't want to ask the government for anything because then they're going to come and get in your business. You know, so giving them correct information about the process, helping them to understand that process is really great. We did several home of your own workshops. Our community wanted to be better than we were before the tornado. So we wanted to get people who had been chronic renters into home ownership, or we wanted people who had been chronic renters in really subpar housing to get safe, affordable rental units. So we did workshops on a home of your own, how to maintain a home. Once you get into a home, how to do that. We did several recovery after a disaster, family financial toolkits, helping families figure out their finances and how to get back on track. We did a lot with disaster preparedness. We didn't want people to not be prepared the next time around. So helping them to understand what they need to do for the next time. We did some, why should I worry about duplication of benefits? Making them understand that if you get this check from FEMA, you don't want to go out and blow it on a vacation because you're supposed to use that money to get back into where you were. And helping them understand why they needed to save their receipts and giving them a Ziploc to put all those receipts in and those types of things. We had a lot, I'm sure you guys have too, a lot of contractor fraud, people who would come in, take your money and leave, or people who would come in and say that they were licensed, bonded, and insured and then do really crappy work and leave. So we did workshops on how to make sure that you are getting a contractor who is a good contractor, that you don't give them money up front, and all of these different things to help them. We had a lot of elderly individuals who were very trusting and who really just wanted to get back, and they would sign over their money, and that was the last they saw those individuals. And then we talked a lot, we gave a lot of pamphlets, but also workshops on the importance of insurance and how renter's insurance is really, really cheap. And those people who had renter's insurance were immediately housed, and how you can prepare for things through insurance and that type of thing. So the disaster resource coffees, Renee and I kind of thought this up, and we said, you know, we should really have some resource coffees, and we didn't know how big they would get. We were going to have periodic coffees for all of our disaster case managers where they could come and learn about the social services, because there's all kinds of traditional social services that are still functioning that also a lot of those disaster case managers don't know about. They're in a different world. A lot of them are lay individuals who have kind of fallen into disaster case management, and they haven't been in the social work business for a long time. So providing those coffees, we ended up, I was in my mind thinking, it would probably be about once a month. We started them almost weekly, and then they were every other week, and they went through the whole 3 years of our recovery. And we provided, every single time we had 75 to 80 people who would come, and it was, Renee calls it kind of like speed dating for social service agencies. We would bring the different entities in, and so we would invite different organizations. It wasn't always social service. Sometimes it was child care. Sometimes it was FEMA coming in. Sometimes it was the VA coming in and letting people know about what their services were. But it was, they would have about 10 minutes, and we'd have about 5 different organizations each time. We always had food and coffee, and they would sit up at the front and they would tell them, here's our program, here's how people qualify, here's the application process, here's any waiting lists we have, here's any restrictions we have, and then they would open it up for questions. It was wonderful. We got it to where a lot of the pastors in the community would start coming because they wanted to be able to also refer people into assistance. And it really became something that people looked forward to learn more. And as those as the new groups came in, we invited them, and they came and they would tell people, here's how you get into our services. Here's how you get assistance for our child care. It was a really, really great best practice. It was easy, it was cheap, and it was extremely effective. Warehouses, Renee already talked a little bit yesterday, I think, about the points of distribution, but we did a lot of points of distribution early on, and then we networked it into one big warehouse. We had a business in town that had a warehouse that they provided as a donation base, and they also provided a staffing individual, and then we had a workforce development person as the secretary administrator of that. And it worked really, really well because all the disaster case managers knew that's where you go to get in for some of that warehousing items. That's why also whenever we contacted Home Depot and said, will you donate 500 doors, we had a warehouse to put 500 doors in. And whenever Good 360, we contacted them and said, will you donate beds, we had a warehouse to put 500 mattresses in. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to go through this quickly, but we had the Multi-Agency Resource Center was a really great opportunity. Also, we regularly would set that up, and it was kind of a one-stop shop for disaster survivors. So it started out the first couple weeks after our tornado, but then we would have it periodically about every 6 months, where people knew for a week, I can go to one location and I can apply for a new food stamp card. I can apply for a new Social Security card. I can get assistance for temporary assistance for needy families, or whatever the case may be. It was where all the different agencies in town came to one building every 6 months, and for a week people could go there and get assistance. Let's see. We did a lot of developing options for long-term community improvement as the Unmet Needs Committee, so we kind of established some ideas that we wanted to move forward after our LTRC stepped down. And those have now become entities in our community. So if anybody wants more information about that, a year or two down the road, let me know. But we have established a poverty program in our community that's really very comprehensive, and it came out of our Unmet Needs Committee. We've established a whole One Joplin community involvement activity that came out of our Unmet Needs Committee. So you can do a lot of things that push you into the future. We've already talked about tracking statistics and the importance of that. It's so extremely important, and then planning for the future. So I mentioned you all have to work together. All those different committees really have to work together. You have to have regular communication. You have to know what the other ones are doing, because if you have a lot of needs and you don't know how many volunteers you have coming in, or you have a lot of individuals who need reconstruction but you're not communicating, you're not going to be effective. And just briefly, the typical case flow, and then I'm going to turn it over to Carol for the disaster case management piece. This is how we worked in Joplin. And the case flow of the connection between the Unmet Needs Committee and the disaster case management. So as a survivor would assist or request assistance from a disaster case management. With Joplin, our LTRC only worked within the disaster case management system. So if a random church over here who's doing really, really great work wanted assistance for one of the people who they are working with, they couldn't come directly to the Unmet Needs Committee and ask for that. They had to go through a disaster case manager, because that disaster case manager is the one trained in vetting everything. They're the ones making sure that there's no duplication of benefits. They're the ones really ensuring that that individual really has a disaster-related need. So we made a requirement in our community that it really had to be, everybody had to go through disaster case management to get assistance at that financial assistance at that unmet needs table. So the disaster case manager verifies any duplication of benefits. They use any available resources they already have. So any of those, the funders that are around the table, they're utilizing all of those different resources that they already have. They already know that they can go to Catholic Charities for X. They already know that St. Vincent de Paul down the street has chest of drawers. Whatever those case may be, they're already going through all of those types of items first. They determine any need for additional financial assistance from the survivor, and then they request that from the disaster case or the Unmet Needs Committee. On behalf of the survivor. The survivor doesn't come to the Unmet Needs Committee and say, I want some money. It goes through that disaster case manager. The Unmet Needs Committee doesn't know the person's name. They don't know who, all they know are their details. It's a single mom, 2 kids, living in a tent, whatever the case may be. That's the kind of information that they know, and you know what their need is. But you don't need to know all of those personal details about them, because you really don't want to be that person who says, oh, I know that person, so I want to give them money. Or, oh, I know that person, I don't like them, I don't want to give them money. So you don't want that kind of responsibility. The Unmet Needs Committee either approves or denies a request. If approval, they provide that financial assistance in a short turnaround. In Joplin, we had 48-hour was a maximum. We said, we will get you that money within 48 hours. We try to do it quicker. Most of the time we would. But we really try to do it as fast as possible. With the exception of occasionally you have a request that's really outlandish that has to go up the chain. So we had a threshold in Joplin, and if somebody met that threshold or below, our Unmet Needs Committee would be able to make that decision. And I've got all of the forms that we use are going to be on our website. You can access that. But above that threshold, it would have to go up the chain. So those sometimes took a little bit longer. Typically, if it's a pretty large request, then it's going to take some time, and that survivor is going to expect that. We never wrote checks to the survivor. Checks were always written to the construction company or to Lowe's for lumber or to wherever the case may be, but it was never written to the survivor. And I think... this is just an example. This is our long-term recovery assistance request form. So this shows you, this is what our Unmet Needs Committee would get. And it actually has the CAN number at the top. That's the only way that we were able to connect who it was. And with that,
that's me.
I'm going to turn it over. Oh, we have a quick question in the back.
Here, I'll take that. You may need the mic still.
Was the Unmet Needs Committee and the folks that made the funding decision, like an Unmet Needs table, were they the same people, or was the Unmet Needs table like a subset? And that's the first question. The second question is, when they're making these funding decisions, what is the pot of money that they were working off of? Was it a collective pot of money that y'all were there to administer, or were there different funders and kind of all coming together?
So your first question, we have the executive team of our long-term recovery committee, and that is who for Joplin, anybody who had a request over $2,000, that was our threshold, had to go up to the full executive team. The under $2,000 threshold was our Unmet Needs Committee. And we didn't take every single, to expedite, we didn't take every single thing to the entire committee because we met once a month. We required that any of our financial assistance had to be signed off on by 2 individuals. It was typically me and one other member from our Unmet Needs Committee. And we had the process down pretty quick. So it was just that Unmet Needs Committee itself. You can structure it however it works best for you, but we wanted to expedite things, and that just worked pretty well for us. If I was out of town, we had a backup, that type of thing. The financial component, we had a pot of money that we had fundraised for. We had gotten some grants for. Early on, we had not very much money, but as it grew, we had a specific pot of money. We also tapped into some Salvation Army money. We tapped into some Red Cross money. We had some money that was earmarked for, it had to be utilized specifically for, women, single-headed households, that type of thing. You really try to avoid as much as possible having restricted funds because it makes it a lot more difficult. So if you can avoid that, that's great, but you may have some money that comes in and say, I want to give you $100,000, but it has to be for this pot of individuals. If it meshes with your mission, great. If you're able to account for that, that's great. But we for the most part, we had a specific pot of money that was all together. We knew how much we had, and we tracked everything. And I can show you, we've had spreadsheets and that documented exactly how much money was spent and where that pot of money was coming from. But we would a lot of times go back to somebody and say, hey, you requested this, have you checked with X, Y, and Z? Because we became really savvy about who had money and who didn't. And that was helpful.
So recognizing that in terms of the philanthropic sector, there are various streams of funding. Some of you as LTRs are getting your own funding for unmet needs, other LTRs, and ostensibly all of you at some point will have other funders coming to the table who want to control their own funding decisions at the unmet needs table. Can you kind of talk through how you utilized your funds that were specifically through the Job Point LTR versus other funders who were committing funds, and how you worked collectively with those funders, respecting the fact that they had their own funding decisions to make internally, and kind of how that looks, just to kind of not muddy the waters in terms of the unmet needs table controls other funders' funding?
We really didn't control the other funders' funding. If they came to us as a community and said, we want to contribute X, Y, and Z, but we want to control that, we requested that they continue to control that and allow our disaster case managers to go to them. And that worked for us. We didn't have an option really. We didn't have very many of those that did that. We had one entity that came to us and said, we want to control the funds. So that one entity, they wanted to significantly control. And we didn't have any paid employees. We didn't have, our fiscal agent was another nonprofit, and that the amount that they wanted to restrict those funds was not really in line with what we agreed with. So we told them, we appreciate, we understand. They actually ended up going directly through Catholic Charities, and anybody who they wanted to fund would then go through Catholic Charities for disaster case management.
Okay, so Damien, I think what you're talking about is Bastrop County Long-Term Recovery Team in recovery from the 2011 wildfire, and probably some of these long-term recoveries are having individual funders come to their unmet needs table. You'll have UMPOR there, you'll have Lutheran Social Services, you'll have Catholic Charities, you'll have different funding groups coming to the table. And so we did that. It was actually a round table, just like you have here that you're sitting at, and they would sit at that table and they would decide how much per case. They would listen to the case manager present the case. They would decide how much per case to put into that pot for that unmet need until that case was fully funded for that need. They would then, we had a form for them to sign where they committed to that amount. And they would then deposit that amount with the long-term recovery. And then they would get an accounting sort of that we had dispersed those funds for that case. And so each case, Janice had each case individually logged by funder on how their funds were spent for that case. We also had an agreement with all the funders that they would sign off on each unmet needs table, that if there was excess funds, that those excess funds could be used on a case that might have gone over budget, or it could be used for another unmet needs case. So those agreements were developed, but we actually had individual funders at the table that did not quite trust us enough yet to say, here's all our money. But I'll fund each case individually. So those systems are actually in place. Those forms will be on our website. That's kind of how you do that process. Now, as we became established and we became a known entity, they started just saying, here's our funds.
And that's what they did in Joplin. I mean, several of those that she mentioned just gave us the funds and put it in the pot. And we had to account to them, and we basically said to them, here's how much we've spent of your money on what. But now Catholic Charities was one of our disaster case management entities, and they did keep their pot, but they weren't around the table with that money. They just utilized it before they came to the unmet needs table.
I'll just talk really, really loud. I think I agree with all that, but I think there's another model that's been used a lot of times where that nonprofit can keep that money themselves, because some agencies just don't have the ability to turn it over, but your accounting piece stays the same. I agree to put $5,000 towards this recovery, and I write that check directly to the recovery. So just to throw out there to keep that as another option, because potentially.
Well, and I think that's what Stephanie was saying, is that for organizations like that, they urge them to keep their money if they were concerned about it.
But I would encourage them to come to that greater table
Yeah.
to collaborate on that front side, rather than doing that away from the table. Have them come to that table, even if they're not writing the check to the unmet needs group, so that they have that collaboration.
And
Well,
that,
and we certainly did that. We had funders with other sources that were resources for us. So
and they were
so
at our,
it's really however you're working,
Yeah.
however you need to work your unmet needs.
they were all at our unmet needs table, but they weren't, because they were utilizing their funds. They heard, here's the need, and they were just working directly with disaster case managers. So they were at the table, they just weren't at that, the official funding table was a little different in Joplin. But whatever works for you, whatever works for your funders, you don't want to say, no, we don't want assistance, except for, whenever they bring truckloads of used mouse poop infested. We had lots of those in Joplin. Yes.
Alrighty, we're gonna.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I just wanted
Got
to
both.
say on the accounting side, I have that great form that I mentioned yesterday that MBS does. So if you want to use that form to keep track of your funders, it also helps keep track of your receipts per project. Just email the disaster leadership team through Nina, and she can send it to you, but I want to walk you through it just to show you how easy it is to use, because to look at it as a blank form, it might not make sense to you.
Alrighty, we're gonna get on with disaster case management, and we're gonna allow Carol some extra time. Here.
You're thinking there may be questions and conversation.
I'm thinking there is.
All right. So good morning. I'm Carol Flores. As Chris said, I am most recently on National VOAD staff as the grant director for the National VOAD portion of the DCMP in Texas. There are 2 DCMPs. I'm going to try to stay in generic disaster case management this morning to just talk about that as a role of recovery, but I fully anticipate there are some specific questions about what that means in Texas right now. So I'm going to start back at Disaster Case Management 101. I think we use words often, a lot of times, without stopping to assess. Better? Good? Oh, too low, too high. Okay, better? Okay. Even lower. All right. I think we use words a lot of times and don't stop to check to see if we're all meaning the same thing when we say the same words. So we're going to go all the way back to the beginning and, at least for today, agree that this is our definition of disaster case management. All right? Oh, hang on. I already jumped ahead. So I pulled this directly from the National VOAD website. You all can go there yourselves. There's a whole big long document that talks about disaster case management guidance. It was developed really in collaboration with all of the National VOAD organizations that have done disaster case management for decades. This is a discipline that has existed for a very, very, very long time in terms of disaster recovery. So we'll read it, even though I don't typically read slides. It's a time-limited process by which a skilled helper or disaster case manager partners with an affected individual or family in order to plan for and achieve realistic goals for recovery following a disaster. Okay? It's comprehensive and holistic approach to recovery and extends beyond providing relief, providing a service, or meeting urgent needs. Okay, that holistic piece is going to be important. So the role of a case manager: serve as a primary point of contact, assisting the client in coordinating necessary services and resources to address the client's complex disaster recovery needs in order to reestablish normalcy. Disaster case managers, this is key, rely on the client to play an active role or lead their own recovery. This is a partnership between a disaster case manager and a client. And they will hear this in training. I mean, this is a key piece of how we understand disaster case management. The hub of a disaster case management experience for the client will be that recovery plan. Okay, it's developed in partnership with the case manager and the client, and it is a step-by-step what needs to happen in order to achieve recovery, as defined by the case manager and the client together. So in all of that, what haven't we mentioned yet? We haven't mentioned long-term recovery committees, right? There's no, that's not in there. We haven't mentioned unmet needs committees. We haven't mentioned, specific resources or any of that. So in that context, for whom does the disaster case manager work? And this is the interactive part of the presentation. Thank you. They work for the client, period. Okay? Disaster case managers don't work on behalf of National VOAD or our partner agencies that are writing their paychecks. They don't work for y'all as long-term recovery entities. They work for the client. Everything else is a tool that supports their work. I'm not calling you tools. I'm calling the work you do a tool that supports the work of disaster case managers. Okay? So sometimes we assume we all know that, and we do know that. We all know that. But we jump right over that and into the structure and who's in charge of what and who's managing which piece and all of that stuff, which is really important. But I wanted to get back to, again, the very basics. Disaster case managers exist to support clients in their recovery, period. Okay? But they do play an incredibly important role in linking clients then to the resources that are available for their recovery. And that is you guys, as long-term recovery committees, as unmet needs tables, as individual organizations with those huge pots of money, right? Okay. So let's talk a little bit. What's the value to you all as recovery committees, as funders, as organizations, to having solid case management in place? Why is that important to you all? Okay, to leverage resources, it helps bring some coordination to those.
So that there will be no supplanting or duplication, and so that the service delivery will be done with quality and as well as quantity.
Okay.
And in a timely manner.
So quality, quantity, timely manner, some sense that we can begin to bring order to chaos, right, of all of the various resources that are out there. What else? Are there other values to that?
They provide the real deal that face to face with the clients.
Ah, yeah. She says they're the real deal. They're the face-to-face with the clients. They're the person who is holding somebody's hand as they navigate their way through this chaos that we know it is. And as much as we try to structure the chaos, it's still chaos, right? It just is.
I also think about the relationship building piece. If we're all working together, I think the client has more trust in us as a cohesive unit and feels like that relationship is valuable, rather than them thinking like we're working against them or we're trying to keep resources to ourselves. Them knowing that we all are coordinated and working together, I think builds that relationship.
Fabulous. Could you all hear her since she's speaking up from the back of the room? Right. It builds relationship. It builds trust. I think to take that a step further, maybe the case managers are sort of that transparency piece of the work that we do, right? Hopefully, if we're doing that well and communicating with each other well. Anything else?
Partnership and empowerment.
Say more.
Partnership and empowerment.
Okay. Say more about that, though. Partnership and empowerment. Here.
Partnership is with, not only with the client, but it is with the agencies, it's with your community, and it's for the journey. And as we develop partnerships, we're developing partnerships with your client, with the agencies, and the empowerment is so that those folks will not be just temporarily helped, they will be permanently guided into how to meet their own needs should the incident or disaster or whatever their life challenge and issues are, so that they can handle them and maneuver through those so that they can also be change agents for themselves.
Very good. Thank you. You want to do the rest of it? Because you got this. Right. I was in a training or a conversation or something the other day, and I said, I think it's much like parenting. If we're doing our job right, we're working ourselves out of a job. Right? That's my goal as a parent. I'm almost there. We're not there yet. So what value is it? And maybe this is an obvious question, but let's get it on the floor. What's the value to the survivor of a solid disaster case management program? We got some of it right here, right? It's that empowerment. There you are.
It was mentioned before too, but a lot of times too, especially after a traumatic event like a disaster, most survivors don't even really know what they need. And those disaster case managers can get them on that path to recovery when they're just like, I have no idea where to start, where to finish, and what's in between.
Sometimes you will have people who are very savvy in navigating the social service network. But in disasters are equal opportunity impactors, right? You will have other people who've never interacted with the social service network before and have no idea what it is they're being asked to do. Yeah, and might be too proud to, right? And so your disaster case managers become that friendly face and that coach and that cheerleader for folks through that. It is daunting for anybody, even those of us who kind of feel like we understand how to navigate the bureaucracy of life, right? Navigating FEMA and all of the other stuff is daunting for anyone. And then you add to that the trauma of the impact itself, and when you're not firing on all cylinders and you're dealing with a whole bunch of other things, yeah, there's no shame in being overwhelmed by figuring out how to work your way through all of this.
I would say, as kind of like a humorous thing, I know
Several jurisdictions are kind of in this boat. Like in Fort Bend, we had 4 presidentially declared disasters in 3 years. Our residents know disaster case management forward and backwards probably better than some of our case managers do. So like the moment a disaster happens, they're called like a long-term recovery group and they're like, we're ready to meet with our case manager. We're ready for you. But we're glad that our public is educated about the long-term recovery process, that sometimes they're ready to start recovery before we are. In fact, we even mentioned here in Fort Bend, I think like in December, even though we were just a couple months past Harvey, we felt like we were already truly in long-term recovery, which does not happen really until like about like the 8-9 month
Like
mark.
now.
Yeah. They were like, we're ready. We're like, okay.
All right, yeah.
I'll just piggyback on that, because having that kind of relationship with your community allows you to access those people and help them in their recovery before they've spent their money.
Yes, 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 yes. So, okay.
And people want to see action. They are still reeling from what they've been through. They're asking for assistance. They're asking for people to, you know, step up and guide them. And when they finally get to the point to where a case manager is made known to them, I think that it's a little relief. And then when they get that call from that case manager, and then they get that, you know, come down, let's fill out an application, let's get you in the system, then they're feeling like, oh gosh, yeah, something is really happening. You know, you have so many people out there who are still, you know, reeling from not getting some kind of assistance elsewhere, or they just need that little bit of extra help to get their homes finished. You know, when they get to that point, I think it just becomes a reality for them that they are going to recover.
Perfect. Okay, so you guys have already done some homework for yourselves. Let's talk about messaging what disaster case management is and what it is not, right? Because we're now inviting people into these relationships of disaster case management. We know it's the link between the survivor and the various resources that are available to them. Almost everyone will want that intermediary of disaster case management rather than directly inviting the public to interact with them as a funder. So the message is, right, hey, sign up for disaster case management to get X. Right? Why? What's wrong with that?
Then they're expecting that they're getting something rather than it being a genuine relationship.
Right. Ah, yes. Participatory, right. And you're right, it's what is available for any particular client is not guaranteed, correct? And so I heard Catholic Charities shared a story with me in another setting the other day that somehow word got out on the street that they had $7,000 worth of furniture to give away, which actually wasn't true, but even if they did, they would have wanted to do that through some sort of organized structure, right? And so if the message had been, call a disaster case manager to access Catholic Charities' $7,000 worth of furniture, and now I call a disaster case manager and they say, fantastic, let me set up an appointment with you, let's do an intake, let me hear your whole story, and I'm going, I just want the $7,000 worth of Catholic Charities furniture. It's going to feel like a bait and switch, isn't it? And they're not wrong about that. In some respects it was. Our intention was never to just simply get people signed up for resources. Remember back to the beginning, it's that holistic relationship. So while resource providers are dependent on disaster case management to be able to get their resources out into the community in a way they feel good about, that's only a piece of the role of disaster case management. Okay? So messaging will be important as you begin to talk with the public about what disaster case management is as it continues to grow in capacity, what it is not, because we don't need as much as possible to set people up for yet another false expectation or misunderstanding.
And I think also sticking to your messaging.
You know, we had a situation this weekend in Houston where Red Cross announced the financial grants that are coming across. And there was one particular media outlet that kind of described it as cash assistance for anyone who was affected by Harvey. And so I think a lot of us in this room our call volume has completely increased since Friday. But being able to really stick to your messaging and stand true to that, and so your clients feel like you're a safe place to get information from, regardless of what's being transpired through the media or other outlets.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, I don't remember what I put next. Oh, I didn't. That's the end of mine. So, all right, I'm going to take a deep breath. Questions? Really? Okay. Hang on. There's several. So do we want to run around with the mic? I think is going to be helpful so everybody can hear. Okay.
And this may be a question everybody in this room can answer, but how many open cases should any one case manager have at a time.
So the ideal is, and it's actually more nuanced than this, but the basic answer is we aim for a ratio of 35 open cases to 1 case manager. Now, open can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, okay? I have seen open mean, I have your name on my desk to call, and that is defined as open. In other settings, open means I have called you, we've talked about what disaster case management is, you've said, yeah, this sounds like a good deal, let's start working together. That's a whole different definition of open, right, than I have your name on my desk to call. So part of it is being very clear as much as we can about what we mean when we use words. Let's not assume that any word, we all mean the same thing. The other piece to that is some cases are less complex than others. So 40, 45 cases of this person just needs kind of a boost, but their case is really pretty straightforward and we're talking a couple visits and we've got them and they feel good about where they're going. Versus somebody who has just incredibly complex unmet needs and extenuating circumstances and all of that other stuff. That's a whole lot different one case than one that's very simple. So we are coaching our case managers to really look at kind of a two-dimensional understanding of that. But in general, the ratio is 35 to 1. Okay.
For the first 6 months, we had our area covered by 2 case management agencies, 1 national VOAD and ourselves. Now we have 4 more additional ones joining the area. What's the plan? Now how to divide that out? I have six case management agencies in 1 county and 1 in another. So are we dividing that geographically, functionally? I mean, so they're all the same, and they all have a FEMA list, and guess what they're doing? They're calling the same people we called 6 months ago. Yeah.
Right, so the idea of the FEMA-funded disaster case management program is to add capacity, okay? It is not to come in and necessarily take over. When funding is running out for local case management, hopefully they're there to pick up that piece. No, beyond a county level, there is not any further subdivision around that. So I have said from the beginning when we've been in these conversations, that does fall at the long-term recovery table. Have a conversation with all of the case management entities and develop a plan for how you want to move forward. They are not bound by any specific geography. So that leaves the room for being creative with y'all, right? Some people will tackle it maybe by, parts of the city or by certain zip codes or by, who knows what. But regardless of whether there was FEMA-funded disaster case management or not, there's always the complication of multiple organizations entering into this fray. And so that coordination really belongs at the local level with all the agencies that are in the same space, working in the same space. Call them together and say, all right, what's the plan? And let's work it out. And I will tell you that the national VOAD agencies have the autonomy to do that at the local level. So, oh wait, we had one over here.
I have a curiosity related to the profile of the case managers, and I wonder if anybody looked at or studied the fact that oftentimes case managers that are involved with our clients tend to have had experiences similar to that of clients that they're working with, or clients in general, as it relates to experiencing their own disasters.
They have or they have not?
They have.
Yes. Because, at least on the National VOAD side of the equation, we value hiring locally, right? And so, to every extent that we can, we have encouraged. So I will tell you, there is no set profile of what a disaster case manager looks like. Each of our agencies that are participating in this, again, have the autonomy to hire as it fits their program and their organization. But there's a high value on hiring locally. So if you're in an area that was heavily impacted, odds are you're hiring somebody who's been through this themselves, which, let's be honest, has its benefits, absolutely, but it's got some pitfalls potentially out there too, right? Because now we're talking about someone who themselves is potentially traumatized, trying to help other people through their trauma, and in some cases that's actually therapeutic for some folks, but in other cases that could be something to keep an eye on. Absolutely. All right, where are we? Oh.
I just wanted to ask if anyone knew when all the counties were going to be contacted about their disaster case management agencies that were going to be helping, because in Bastrop County we haven't been contacted yet.
So as they come online, they're being encouraged to show up at the long-term recovery tables. So it may mean that they don't have staff there just yet, but my instruction to folks has been to find and check in with the long-term recovery committees when you're there.
Do they have a deadline, or is there a time period when they should have contacted the counties? When everybody should be online?
So our goal is to have everybody hired over the course of this summer. Some organizations are further down that road than others, so it's happening even as we speak. So I would say give them another couple weeks.
And was there a determining factor how they contacted the counties? Like, does this county get contacted and staffed according to how many people were affected in their county?
No, we weren't quite that granular about it, honestly. So the numbers of case managers assigned to the county, I will tell you, was driven by the FEMA-funded case managers assigned to each county was driven by a formula from FEMA. Okay, so the providing agencies had no say in that. We were told FEMA will fund X number of case managers here, X number of case managers here, X number of case managers here. So no, we weren't kind of prioritizing how to ramp up. I will tell you the National VOAD side, across the entire declaration, we have 14 different case management providing organizations through subcontracts. Because again, our goal was to really utilize organizations by and large that were already in the communities where they were asking to serve, or had existing relationships or things from other disasters. So that means we're kind of all lifting all at the same time, but people are in different stages of that depending on their own internal organization structure.
Right here.
Oh.
Hold on a second. Quick question. So the case management groups that are FEMA funded, are they required to connect with the long-term recovery group, or can they work autonomously?
Yes, so we're back to long-term recovery is a big piece of how case managers get their job done. So yes, they need to and they should.
Are they required?
The contract says that they will coordinate and work with long-term recovery groups in their community. With the understanding, guys, remember, they are doing disaster case management. Long-term, absolutely, they will coordinate with you all, but they will not change up their training and how they've been instructed to do disaster case management. Now, as there's nuances in each community as to how case management connects in with the long-term recovery, they have the autonomy, again, to work with and coordinate with you all. But it's not, they don't work for you guys. They work with you guys.
Carol, thank you. A little bit more detail about what's in the contract, like dates. Do we have them for 18 months starting on a particular date? And then how is each agency tasked with showing, effectiveness in the contract? Do they have to present a certain number of cases to a long-term recovery committee, or do they just have to contact so many clients, or there are lots of layers of what they're being asked to report?
Sure. The contract runs right this minute until April 24th of 2019, regardless of when they get started. Sorry, August, yes. Thank you. Wrong A month. August 24th of 2019. By statute, FEMA-funded disaster case management is 24 months from the date of declaration, regardless of when it actually gets stood up. We expect to apply for an extension to that. We're not anywhere near that yet. That doesn't mean we'll get it, but we do expect that we will be applying for an extension to that, in part because we were funded as if we were running for 24 months, and clearly we won't be fully operational for 24 months. What they're required to report on. So we have, on the National VOAD side, built out a very robust monitoring, evaluation, and data team who will be collecting and reporting and looking at a lot of data. We are not being held by FEMA to specific metrics, specific targets. We're being tasked to do the work, okay? Now, we have an expected caseload that we think we will serve, and that's how we decided how, that's how FEMA decided how many case managers we were assigned. And we will be reporting on, and we're expected to report on, but without a particular target number, we are expected to report on the return that case managers are able to access for their clients. So the value of those resources that case managers are able to access for their clients. We will be tracking that, and we'll be reporting that back to FEMA. I will tell you, we all gathered in a meeting together last week in Austin, and remember, this is just the National VOAD side of the equation. I can't speak for the state. They've been charged with tracking and reporting those same things. Our expected number that we think we're going to hit, and so we're going to hold this in front of our agencies to see how we do, is that we think our case managers will connect their clients with a total of $335 million in resources. Okay? That is in kind, that's volunteer hours, that's actual financial assistance, that's value of services, that's all of that. We'll translate that all into dollars, and we think, and we're aiming for, that the National VOAD Consortium will collectively connect our clients to $335 million worth of resources. So we'll see if we get there. But we've put that big goal out in front of us. So when our case managers hound you for that data, it's because we're hounding them, just so you know, because we want to collect as much of that as possible.
Quick question and then comment.
I'll quit calling on people. I'll let them manage
We were
it.
wondering, is that new money or money that's already been dispersed? And then I have a comment.
So the way we're going to look at that is we're trying to value FEMA's investment in disaster case management. So it's going to be because of the money that FEMA spent on disaster case management. So really it's new money. If it's work that they did on the FEMA grant, while they were under the FEMA grant, we want to capture it.
And then my comment was more related to how do we get disaster case management to work better together? And so to that, I just wanted to say that it's also a relationship building process with the individual case management agencies.
Absolutely.
They need to see what the benefit and the value for them is in being a part of these different committees and attending all these meetings that require that collaboration and connection. And so you have to invest in them as well and let them see what the benefit is. And the other piece of that is provide them tools to be successful. So one thing we did after Harvey is we created a universal intake form that could be used by any case management agency because Houston's huge. And we had a lot of grassroots agencies that came into play immediately after Harvey and that were doing canvassing and going into individuals' homes, but weren't capturing the data that was needed. So we created a universal intake tool that anyone can use that captures the same data that we need for FEMA and CAN and different things like that. So I love the coffee for case management, yeah. And I just think you have to constantly stay connected with them. So in our case management work group, we try to do work groups where we create resource building and roundtables to talk about challenging cases, but you have to show them that there's a benefit to being a part of this process.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's one back here. Yeah.
So, an issue, not really an issue, a disconnect that we had with the case management firms coming into our county initially was what data would flow from them back to the LTRG so we could understand the state of the recovery as it was progressing. And I think we've kind of reached a really good solution to that. But I would think, in general, what are the expectations for the kind of data that the case management firms do feed back to the LTRGs so they can understand that? That's my first question. I'll have another one.
Okay, so again, I think that's a local conversation. What would be helpful for you all, right? Case managers will not give you PII, but to the extent that there's information at an aggregate level that would be helpful to you, know that we have it and we have access to it. Their primary charge is to coordinate with the long-term recoveries in terms of outreach and coordination of coverage and in understanding the process for approaching the long-term recovery committee, unmet needs, that kind of thing. But if because of our case management work we have data that would be helpful to you all, absolutely. And we will pull that and provide it. We've not shaped what that looks like. So.
Yeah, because the concern I had is like if the county judge has a problem or if he wants a question on how that's working, he would come to us at the LTRG and he wouldn't go to the DCM provider. So we need to be at least equipped to have that conversation at any given time. My second question comes around a number of the DCM agencies have unmet needs funding, that they administer, like Catholic Charities, for instance, and some of the others. Is there an expectation or is there any consideration about, how much or if some of the DCM providers have that they're able to distribute versus others that may not or have less than that?
So that is a separate hat that each of those agencies wear. We have, as a DCM, we have zero control or say in how they use their privately raised funds. The expectation always is, as a VOAD community with our 4 Cs and those kinds of things, is that we do that as collaboratively as possible. And again, local relationships, local conversations. But the DCM program itself, the FEMA-funded DCM program, has absolutely zero influence on how agencies spend their privately raised dollars.
We're going to have to cut off questions at this point so that we can move on a little bit. If you still have questions and you want to get with Carol, please certainly do.
Yes.
Let's please thank Carol and Stephanie.